Thank you everyone for being here. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see you all in Bangalore and at this festival. Um, we can structure this with a quick introduction to the anthology and then go through the different poets in discussion, have some poetry read, and discuss what it means to be a city poet in India, but also what a city poem specifically entails. When I was putting this anthology together, there were sort of three broad diversities that really came to mind. One of which was the sort of just general geographic spread, right? How does one compress or try to compress a country as diverse as India into an anthology, and let alone an urban India anthology? And sort of the compromise we came to was 37 cities from across the countries, all the way from the sort of the great, famously poetic and anthologized cities like Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, but then also we went as far as Shillong in the northeast. Up north, we went to Srinagar, and down south, Trivandrum. So in one way, it was an attempt to capture the geographic breadth of the country. The second thing that we really tried to do was linguistic breadth, right? Because there is a lot of fantastic poetry being written in a number of regional languages in India, but it's very often you see a number of them in one single book alongside English poetry. So an attempt was really made to get together this linguistic diversity. So there's 20 languages all the way from Maitreyee, Assamese, Bengali, to Polish. We have a Polish poet in the collection as well. And then the third sense is what I will use to transition to the conversation today, is temporal breadth, right? The beauty of Indian cities is that sort of for as long as we have the earliest written records, we have been living in some form of cities. The oldest Sanskrit plays often feature cities and speak of them in these senses. And the book brings together sort of the mythic and the fabled poets as old as sort of Valmiki and Surdas, all the way to the contemporary poets who we have sitting here with us today. And the sort of breadth of these poets and their approaches towards putting together poetry has really been wonderful to see. And I just want to shout out some of these poets who are not only on stage here today, but also doing other panels. We have K. Srilata, who has some fantastic poetry in the book, Mamta Sagar, Riaz Latif, and Manjul Bajaj as well, who are not on stage today, but have contributed fantastically to this collection in addition to the poets we have today. One thing that has been coming up in these conversations I've been having with poets over the last 2 or 3 days in Bengaluru specifically, is the idea of a changing city, right? People who've lived here their entire lives talk about the fact that the city is before their eyes transforming and metamorphosing into something that they didn't really grow up with or they didn't really experience, both for the better and for the worse. And that's a tool in which poetry really comes to the fore, right? It serves as a form of archival memory keeping, of preserving a heritage and a memory of the city, both personally but also societally. And I feel like Maitreyee, who's on stage with us today, does a fantastic job of capturing this in her poetry and in her work. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the role of a poet as a memory keeper, as someone who archives and preserves a city as a living memory in some senses.
Yeah, thanks, Bilal. Hello, everyone. So, I've been something of a walking poet, if there is such a term. So a lot of my poetry gets written while I'm walking. And I think mapping the cities that I've inhabited, whether it's Bangalore or Kolkata, has been through my walks through the cities. In this context, I remember a poster, an old Nike poster that I used to have during my hostel days in the university, where it said, there'll be clubs that you'll never belong to. There'll be neighborhoods that you wouldn't ever live in, but the roads, they're always open, so run. And that tagline sort of stayed with me, and I went out to the streets to meet the people who would never come to my house. I went out to map my cities the way I saw them in the middle of the chaos. And from there came a lot of poems, one of which I would like to read today. It's called 12 by 12, The Rosary Shop. I live in a part of Bangalore. When I came to Bangalore in the late 90s, it was a very different city. And I lived in the eastern Kalyan Nagar Banaswari site. Those of you who are from here will recognize it as one of the prettiest, greenest areas of Bangalore. Also, a lot of the Anglo-Indian community that stays there. So this is part of that section of the society. It's called 12 by 12, the Rosary Shop. Do you recollect the Beecham Garden at the end of High Street? Or 12 by 12, the shop I brought the rosaries from, the hot pink flowers that bloom still in Hutchin Road homes, the late-night corner house stroll by the edge of Richards Park, where crimson azaleas smell of ice cream. Or remember the kamini that sprung white into the autumn night and the scented trail it had sprung, the flower cellar you bought my first Rajanigandas from, and the Holy Ghost Church corner where the chorus sang in Tamil. City of my walks, you're tattooed into my flesh, from afternoons of roadside smells, of MTR dosas and puliogre nights, and lovers in every shadow. I walk through every street now like blind men who touch their skin, tenderly familiar and with expectations still. Thank you.
One of my favorite lines from that poem is, "You're tattooed into my flesh," and I feel like that's a sentiment that city poets really take seriously. There is this sense of both belonging, where you belong to the city, but the city is also something you carry with you. And a lot of, I call them exiled poets, really feature this tradition quite strongly. Agha Shahid Ali who probably is the best example of this, where no matter where he was in the world, he was writing of a Srinagar, maybe not a Srinagar that continued to exist, but a Srinagar of his past, and he carried it with him. Nizam Ezekiel has an interview where he says, "I bleed Bombay." And there's this sense of the city poet that they are intrinsically linked to the city that they carry with them, and the city that seems to follow them, often like a ghost, wherever they go in the world and wherever they experience it. But leading on from there, I feel like you could sort of pull this back temporally, and it's not just being tattooed in the flesh, but also written into the stone and built into the foundations of the city. And there's a sense of the ancient and the fabled and the mythic that comes out, especially when we discuss cities like Ayodhya, like Varanasi, like Lucknow, that have sort of very old, ancient heritages and roots that go deep into the foundation of the city, and we sort of, like a palimpsest, build upon it year after year and generation after generation. And a poet I really admire, Vivek, has been able to masterfully both blend the modern interpretation of a poet with these sort of traditional ideas and be inspired and in many ways reinterpret a lot of these classical city poets in ways unimaginable. And I was wondering if you could tell us about the way sort of fables and myths really feed into the way city poetry comes to the fore.
Yeah, so very happy to be in this amazing anthology. And I have three poems in it, but from a book called After, which was an engagement with an ancient text, Valmiki's Ramayana. And the first revelation was that most people don't know Valmiki's Ramayana, and it's a different text than what you might imagine. So I started out, and there are cities, of course, in Valmiki, which I'll talk about in a second. But so I started out in a way with a lot of anger towards this text, and it is kind of patriarchal and problematic in various ways. And initially, my poems were attempts to kind of read the gaps in the text, like what is it not saying. But then as I gradually went into it, I realized that it actually was able to handle this kind of questioning. And I moved into the space of not the Ramayana of the ideal types, but the questioning Ramayanas, the Ramayanas that force you to ask questions, impossible choices. What's the impact of violence, for instance? By the end of the book, I had a very different relationship with this text, which was a very close reading of it. Um, so now there are three cities. One of the things that the text is always trying to work out is the relationship between city and forest. And forests have cities in them, and cities have forests in them, and that's a kind of perpetual conflict that has been working itself out in India from the time of Valmiki to today. So three cities. One is Kishkinda, which is the simian capital in the woods. And the simians, the monkeys, in a way, are the most human characters. We can really relate to them. They like to drink, they like to have sex, they kind of, sometimes they get a little bit distracted, it's okay. And so they represent that kind of opening. And then you have Lanka. Lanka, most of it at the beginning is seen through Hanuman's eyes, and it's an extremely opulent place. So there again, citizens like to live good lives. They like to be out, kind of enjoy themselves. And you'd be surprised to find that there are long passages of praise for Lanka, the kind of, the beauty of the city and the way the citizens go by. And then there's the kind of horrible event of collective punishment. It's a city that faces collective punishment in the fire. And Valmiki is not afraid to show us innocents burning in this fire, including children being the targets of collective punishment. And then, of course, there's, Ayodhya. And, the three poems I have, one of them is set in Varanasi, Kashi. And it's part of a long series of poems that give you snapshots of the Ganga at different times, the river Ganga from the mountains to the Bay of Bengal. But this first one, this is maybe the very first poem I wrote for this book. So it was kind of like, the kind of initial prodding of trying to see what the text is saying and what it isn't saying. And as I said, the Ramayana can handle that kind of questioning. Ayodhya. This is from just right at the beginning of the Ayodhya Kando, it's like kind of praise. No one is poor in Ayodhya. No one is unhappy in Ayodhya. No one goes hungry in Ayodhya. No one is robbed in Ayodhya. No one is illiterate in Ayodhya. No one is an atheist in Ayodhya. No one is cruel or miserly in Ayodhya. No one is a slave in Ayodhya. No one is sick in Ayodhya. No one is old or crippled in Ayodhya. No one in Ayodhya. So I'm going to read one more, if I can. Okay, so as I said, the Ramayana, the Ayodhya, the concept of Ayodhya is the ideal city, right? And philosophers, there are other ideal cities, Jerusalem, the philosopher Gillian Rose. So the city is supposed to be seen as the kind of ideal moral place, the kind of pinnacle of human civilization, right? But also the questions always arise: what kind of violence does it rest on? And so there's Jerusalem. I quoted from a West African epic called Gasire's Loot, and there they talk about the city of Wagadu. And these are places that force you to think about statecraft and violence. And so the later part of Africa moves increasingly into present-day India. So this is 2015, Bisada village, Dadri, Greater Noida, in memoriam Muhammad Akhlaq. in the far southeastern corner of Delhi spread, into a neighboring state just where the white turns green with wheat, sugarcane, rice. Mohammed Akhlaq was their local fix-it guy, electrician, ironsmith, plumber, even country gun maker, wife a seamstress. They wear the service economy as much as this modest patch could afford, where the farmers owned and worked or worked their relatives in the fields. Akhlaq, friend to everyone, guy who came and did the necessary in your own home. But he was a smith, descendants of smiths who traveled with the Hindu armies, and in his 50s quietly prospered. After his son became an Air Force technician, After his son became an Air Force technician in Chennai, he began to refuse jobs, even though he knew the locals too well. The fascist party leader's sons had eaten mutton at his home for Eid. Whose particular anger killed him, we still don't know, nor how much land-grabbing exercise and how much impetuous youth, how much adventure gone wrong, how much, in fact, the calculations of elders. Mohammed Akhlaq was hated for the slim pickings he'd put together, hated for his fridge whose contents were tested and retested in labs far and near. But above all, he was Muslim, the one they hated without ever comprehending why. He was proud, perhaps too proud of his son, and he's grown pious. In his piety, it only served to shame them, frame their confusion. That night, when the mob, was it thousands or just half a dozen, had him at its heels, the bitterness that knew no bounds broke free, like an arrow bent from the target, or banking toward a target. And the hope was always for the easy win, and the result always the unwished for horror reigned, with omens differentially but unsparing of any house in the hamlet. And the true sacrifice at the center was never a cow, but the very first the ancestors made, admitted even if very rarely spoken of, the cut done at the separate altar that trapped us like figurines in our guilt. The sacrifice of a one who was not us, but us, whose blood, when it broke, was both distant and sickeningly familiar. A one whose very innocence and trusts in others and in everyday life, his genial entreaties, his refusal of evil, galled them as signs of his weakness, his stupid kindness, his lack of worth for their world, and the angry fantasies that ranged in it.
Thank you very much for that very moving poem. And I feel like Vivek's poems often need to be seen on a screen or on paper to really enjoy them, because I feel like the use of spacing and blank space tends to be something I find quite inspiring and quite interesting. But I think picking on something you said earlier about Valmiki's work specifically, is that something I feel like we've lost in the last centuries or so is setting poetry to music, right? A lot of sort of the great earliest poetry, Valmiki, Surdas, the Bhakti movement, but then even later with the ghazals written by Mir and Ghalib and such, have often sort of really been enjoyed when they're put to music. And in the last couple of years, we see a lot of performance poetry, but not a lot of poetry treated as music. It becomes song, but we don't think of it as poetry. And there was a sense of, when we were thinking through these cities, that do modern songs in some ways have lyrics that if we sort of forgot the music for a second, would stand their ground as poems and as fantastic poems. And Bruce, who's with us, and his band Thermal and a Quarter, had a song on Bangalore called the Bangalore Blues that I felt was just a perfect encapsulation of A, the energy of the city, but B, the fact that there is this sense where music, and rock music especially, could really stand ground as poetry in and of itself, even when you sort of mute the drums and mute the guitar and just look at the text and the poetry itself. And I was wondering if you could speak to sort of the sense of musicality that city poetries bring us and the ideas that they often foster.
Hi, it's nice to be here among such an august gathering of lovers of poetry and practitioners of poetry as well. As a musician, I feel not awkward, but a little strange because I'm usually on stage holding a guitar with like a drummer behind me and all of that stuff. It's rare to find myself in a situation like this. So in terms of an obsession with the city, I think a lot of our songs, going back to 1999, have told stories of the city as we know it and our lives through it. So in 2002, we put out an album called Jupiter Cafe, which again was a kind of transformational time in Bangalore. It was the dot-com boom had just about kind of imploded, and but a lot of things had changed forever, right? And so a lot of those songs spoke of our identity as these weird English-speaking Indians who play rock music, but who are still in many ways inextricably tied to our traditions and to our food and to our culture and so on. So it's been a really interesting thing to kind of capture the vibe of this city as we grow old through it. And as a band, we've been around almost for 30 years now. So it's an interesting spread of time in which to write about the city we live in and to maybe capture images and experiences that we've had and set them to song, because that's what we kind of do. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Bhakti movement, because for the last few months, almost a year now, I've been collaborating with a singer called Pallavi, MD Pallavi, who has been singing vachanas and singing poetry from the 11th century up to now in various performances. But now we've kind of put together music more from my lens of coming from a more blues and rock tradition, and marrying that to the intensely progressive and forward-thinking ideas in these poems, right? And these are 11th century poets writing about social justice, equality, brotherhood, the caste system, classism, things like that, in ways that have survived 800 years, right? And so it's interesting for me as a songwriter to set these poems to a new kind of music in that sense. And when we spoke just outside the hall, and you were saying, what do you want to read? And I mean, the poem is here. I sing it all the time, so I don't need the text.
Fantastic.
That's an unusual thing, I suppose. But I actually wanted to maybe read a little bit of that, but also the experience of working with the vachanas and the vachanakaras and the poetry from then has kind of inspired me to write more in that vein, and trying to encapsulate their decidedly non-elitist working class perspectives, because that's where a lot of that poetry comes from, and a lot of the most progressive ideas have come from those people, right? There's a song we do written by a sex worker whose pen name is Sule Sankava, which translates to the whore Sankava, right? And to have that in the 11th century and write a poem about her work, her trade, and to refer to her deity as Nirlajeshwara, which is the shameless one, right? I mean, I have goosebumps just talking about it, So it's very powerful stuff. It's extremely powerful stuff, very progressive, and it's been a joy to bring some of that to life in a different way through a more contemporary frame of musical interpretation. So I've been really happy to do that. So if you want, I can speak a little bit about. But should I do the other poem first and then do Bangalore Blues? Sure. Yeah, that I'll have to read because I don't sing that yet. So I took inspiration from some of those poems about, and sometimes it's interesting how they use their trades to communicate metaphors as to these human conditions and these experiences we have when we live in large gatherings of people in cities, and So this is a little one called sofa repair, right? So, and it's something that also harkens back to a time spent in Bangalore when you had these street vendors, walking the streets and with their particular strident calls that you would hear way inside your home. They have a particular frequency down to the T in terms of there was a particular, as a musician, there's that between 800 and 3 kilohertz. When you get that, they'll hear you. No matter where you are, you're going to be heard. So this is sofa repair. They say life is like a movie. So then, do you just sit in the soft embrace of a plush sofa and watch? Maybe there has already been too much watching. Your sofa is tired, torn, beaten, hard, scarred, and bleeding, and you have become soft. But worry not, I am here. Please lift yourself up. Join the players on stage. What? There's no script? That's fine. Just keep moving whilst I get my tools. This could take a while. Your sofa is ready, plumped again, its comfort a promise, to soothe your tired, torn, beaten, hard, scarred, bleeding self. Ye gods, I have never seen you happier. Ah, yes, for a good life, you must sofa. That's sofa repair. Yeah, so Bangalore Blues was actually part of a project and an album called No Wall Too High, and it was featured as one of the songs in there, and it's the only song on the album that has no other instruments apart from guitar and a three-part vocal harmony, very Crosby, Stills and Nash kind of inspired. And the album No Wall Too High speaks of division between people, division between but also division between the old and the young, division between the past and the present and the future. So Bangalore Blues kind of fit into that. And it was, an old Bangalorean reminiscing about what the Bangalore was and what Bangalore is and what it might be. And just kind of exploring that through song. It's getting warm here now. Just look up at the sky. Clouds of dreams and smoke and street-side stir-fry. The old city, she hides beneath a coat of beeswax. Got to pay your number man, got to pay your goods and services tax. You can hear me grouse, so now you have the news. I've got a bad case of the Bangalore blues. There's 2 more verses, but that's fine.
That's nice.
I think we have some time for questions as well. Perfect. So, any questions in the audience? Please. Perfect.
We good? All right. This one is for Mani. We're talking about music and poetry together, and I think in the last 5 to 6 years, if you were on the internet, you'd see how Desi hip hop has really come to life with a lot of poets. I mean, a lot of poetry and a lot of rhyming, etc. How? I mean, it's not so much a question as much as a statement, but traditional nature of poetry while you bring it up with something as modern as rap and hip hop?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, in terms of spoken word and rap and hip hop and so on, I don't think it's new. It's just that it's evolved across the last 40 or 50 years or so. And so if I understand your question right, you're asking how do you marry the devices of traditional poetry with the demands of having to place it inside these musical arrangements and in some way bring it to, there's a kind of sound associated with hip hop. There's a sound associated with rap. And I really don't see a problem in that sense, because I think these art forms of writing verse, whether it's free verse, whether it's iambic pentameter or whatever you want to call it, and marrying that to music, even without a sense of a song structure of verse, chorus, bridge, and so on, has happened throughout the history of documented, art and songwriting and storytelling and so on. So it's just one more example of how it can evolve and morph and change and metastasize into this thing that acquires even more power thanks to its placement in this kind of frame of hip hop with those beats and those sounds and the soundscape of that. I think it's just a testament as to how the writer and the musician, sometimes they're the same person, sometimes they're not, have to kind of work together to make that marriage successful, which means that there has to be some give and take on both sides, as with all marriages. And if it comes together well, the audience loves it, and there's a message that carries forth. So I don't really see it as a challenge. It's, in a sense, yes, it's work, but all of this stuff takes work and takes time. So I guess if you're in it, you'll get it done.
I've been told we only have 2 minutes, and I felt, given it's a poetry festival, it might be best to end with poetry. I was wondering if Maitreyee, you might be interested in reading your other poem in the book as well, given that we are in Bangalore, and I think it speaks to a certain sense of being a Bangalore resident in Bangalore and growing up in the city.
Actually, I was thinking of reading a poem on another city.
Please, be my guest.
Since I spend a lot of time in Calcutta also, a couple of years back, I was asked by Nat Geo, the magazine, to trace the path of Allen Ginsberg while he was in Calcutta in the 60s. I have a book on a poetry revolution based out of Bihar and Bengal. And I discovered as a part of writing this article something called the Pice Hotel. The Pice Hotel is a phenomenon in Bengal where you get very cheap food, healthy food, at really nominal prices, and you can really have a wholesome food. So I wrote a poem that's called Pice Hotel. It's an ode to Calcutta, Kolkata. Pice Hotel. This desire to kiss you in the by-lanes of Dharmatala. Find a seedy hotel with green shoddy curtains and cheap tin spoons, where men wear yesterday's satin ties and kiss women in frilled pink petticoats, where tea is a mixture of yesterday's thought and today's brew, there, where the chairs are a plastic red, bent somehow in anticipation of a transient love on lonely Sundays, where lonely men eat with themselves, where turmeric-stained nails talk to yesterday's fish, there, in a god-lined blue wall, your smell became mine, stale from the whitewashed, distempered love, mixed in the incense of a discarded 10-rupee note. We climbed walls and stayed red. There, where the Pice Hotel still stands, forgetting is easy and remembrance long. Thank you.
And with that, if you were interested in reading these poems, reading them, as well as 375 more visions of what an Indian city looks like, please consider getting the anthology. And with that, please join me in thanking your poets for today, Vivek Narayanan, Maitreyee Chowdhury, and Bruce Lee Money.
And a word of congratulations and thank you to our lovely editor, Bilal Moin, who has painstakingly worked for the last 2 years to bring together this fantastic anthology, really a much-needed anthology. Thank you, Bilal.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
it's a
Bilal.
total labor of love, and yeah, seriously, thank you for dreaming this up and making it happen. Because, like they say, dreams are dreams till somebody puts this in your hands.
Brought together very diverse voices. So those of you who belong to the urban sphere of India, or even not, you'll find a lot of resonance here, I think. Thank you.